Well, good afternoon, everyone. In terms of the schedule ahead for the month, you heard from the Majority Leader. I would just make one suggestion that I've made to him. We'd have a better chance of working our way through the bills that we need to pass if we cut out the show votes and didn't eat up time trying to score points for the fall election. The biggest current crisis we have, obviously, is the border security issue. Senator Cornyn has spent a lot of time on that, and I'm going to ask him to address that issue. We have a bill on the floor right now that enjoys pretty significant bipartisan support. I think the majority surely understands now the way you pass bills in the Senate is you have some amendments. And I'm sure there are demands for amendments on both sides on the sportsman's bill. Hopefully we'll have an amendment process that's reasonable and be able to get the bill off the floor. So let me turn to Senator Cornyn to discuss the border issue.
Well, to his credit, President Obama has come to Texas in the last few years to help us mourn tragedies at places like Fort Hood and West, which makes it all that much more inexplicable why he would refuse to carve out just 1 hour out of his fundraising schedule over the next 2 days in Texas to come to the border at the site of what he calls a humanitarian crisis, and I would call that the same thing. I know under pressure from Governor Perry, he's now extended an invitation to the governor to attend an immigration roundtable tomorrow afternoon in Dallas, Texas, which is 500 miles from where the crisis is ongoing. So I hope the president will reconsider. He really needs to go there and see this for himself and not just rely on his advisors, because this is a crisis that's ongoing. Unless we get to the root causes of the crisis, it will get worse, and he needs to lead and not just follow when it comes to coming up with the solutions. And the first thing he needs to do is go to the border tomorrow or Thursday when he's in Texas.
Poll after poll continues to show that the president's job approval performance is viewed unfavorably by the American people. In fact, the last Quinnipiac poll had his disapproval rating at 53%, his approval rating at 40%. 55% of the people surveyed in that poll disapproved of Obamacare, and among independents it was even higher. 62% disapproved of Obamacare, which is why there are these stories that are starting to come out. This is an Associated Press story by Chuck Babington that ran over the weekend. Senate Democrats try to pull focus from Obamacare. Politico yesterday, front page story. Obamacare War Room prepares for September surprise, in which it points out that the White House has assigned 6 people to work with Senate Democrats and House Democrats trying to do damage control over the premium increases that are coming later this year. And then if you flip over to page 8, liberals open to scrapping the employer mandate. So it's just story after story about how the Democrats are running, literally running, scared from their signature accomplishment. I mean, think about that. This is the issue that everybody was hailing. It was going to be the solution to the health care crisis in this country, and now Democrats here in the Congress are hightailing it, running away from that issue. And it suggests to me, I think, what most of the American people have already concluded, and that is that this is a bad law with bad consequences, higher premiums, higher deductibles, higher copays, fewer doctor choices, fewer hospital choices for the American people. And the Democrats who voted for it are trying as hard as they can to distract from it and to talk about anything but Obamacare. Well, I don't think the American people are going to give them that luxury. I don't think they're going to forget. I think this is an issue that they own, they voted for, and they're going to have to deal with the consequences of it until such time as they decide that this was the wrong course of action and are willing to work with Republicans, roll up their sleeves, and try and put solutions in place that actually will address the high cost of health care in this country and give people more options and more choices.
And don't forget the promise that the president made, that premiums would actually go down by $2,500 per family when it comes to health care. Nancy Pelosi saying the cost will actually go down And now what we're seeing is as state after state comes out with their premiums for next year and the insurance companies tell what they're going to have to charge in the exchanges, premiums have gone up. Just this past week, the numbers came out from New York, and once again we see double-digit increases, not a decrease, but an increase in double digits of the premium and the cost of health insurance. So the 6-member team of the group that's going to work to try to spin the bad numbers at the White House, I mean, that seems to be the president's solution, is not to actually work to lower the cost, but to spin the bad results. And the president says forcefully defend and be proud. I want to see Democrats come to the floor of the Senate and forcefully defend and be proud of this health care law that they have all voted for. Now, the president has been very slow to act and slow to lead on all other topics. You see in the issue of what's happening at the border, the president's going to Texas to have fundraisers, but yet not go to the border to face the problem. You see him been slow to act and to lead when it came to Iraq, when it came to Syria, when it came to the Ukraine. The only area where he seems to put a war room together to function on these issues is on a health care law that is bad for patients, it's bad for the doctors and nurses who take care of those patients, and it's turning out to be terrible for taxpayers.
So the House of Representatives this week will pass the 6th appropriations bill. They'll be halfway through passing those bills, and they've done that what the old-fashioned way, also known as the constitutional way, where you bring the bills to the floor, use this long-forgotten process in the Senate called amendments, and let every member bring every amendment they want to bring as to how the money could be better spent or not spent at all, and they're managing to do that. I think it's been 130 some days since any Democrat in the Senate had a voted on amendment in the Senate, and we've had maybe less than a dozen Republican amendments voted on in the Senate in the last year. And speaking of the constitutional way, clearly the recent session of the Supreme Court, not good for the administration, whether it was deciding whether the Senate was in session or not, which surprisingly the Supreme Court said the Senate gets to decide whether the Senate's in session or not the president, or the employer case, Hobby Lobby, Conestoga cabinets making the decision that really, unless there's an overriding unless you've done everything you could to find another way around it, you can't force a business to choose between their business and their faith, or their faith to give up their business for their faith, or their faith for their business. I'd like to see us on our side vote on the Enforce the Law Act that I introduced to give members more standing to get to court earlier, so it doesn't take forever to determine that the administration is headed in the wrong direction. That's why I'm supportive of what Speaker Boehner is going to try to do in the House. There need to be quicker ways for members of Congress to intervene. It shouldn't take years after people, for instance, are illegally appointed to a job for somebody to be disadvantaged by the rules they pass and then have to go through level after level of court before you decide, well, we've got to go back and do that all over again because it was done wrong the first time.
Yeah.
On immigration, do you support the amount of emergency funding the president is seeking?
Well, you know, we just got it about 2 hours ago, and we're going to take a look at it. This is clearly a huge crisis. Senator Cornyn, as I said, knows a lot more about this than any of the rest of us because he represents a state that's dealing with it directly. But I don't have an opinion yet about the president's request. We'll take a look at it.
Should the emergency funding be paid for?
Well, look, we need to take a look at what he's asking for here and see if it's an appropriate response to the crisis that we have.
Whatever the response is, though, should it be paid for? Or is this emergency spending?
I think we're going to have to take a look at it and see what he's asking for and how it appropriately, if it appropriately, responds to the crisis.
Senator Cornyn said yesterday that allegations of voter fraud in Mississippi need to be vigorously investigated. Is that productive? Do you agree?
Well, I assume that people in Mississippi will look at whatever complaints are filed. That's the way it typically happens in a post-election situation. If there are complaints filed, they're dealt with at the state level. And, we'll see what.
Do you think the election in there has been settled?
It'd be up to the people in Mississippi to determine the outcome. I think it's pretty clear who won. And Senator Cochran ran a very successful runoff campaign and got the most votes. But anybody's entitled to contest the outcome, and that may well happen in Mississippi.
Senator McConnell, you mentioned specific ideas about improving security and enhancing technologies and whatnot down there that can help address this problem. I'm wondering if you're shooting for Senator Cornyn has any specific ideas about adjustments, amendments you'd like to see to the president's supplemental.
Well, what is disappointing is that apparently the president's given up on any effort to effect the kinds of reforms that he knows and his administrations know are necessary to prevent this surge of unaccompanied children from continuing and getting even worse. But I know that out of the $3.7 billion, there's money spread a little bit everywhere, but one of the things we're going to be looking at is where it can be placed to the greatest effect. One of the biggest problems is the perception that if children or adults who with children make it to the southern border, they'll be able to stay. And basically that's because of the so-called notice to appear, which in essence has been called in different circles the notice to disappear. And roughly 90% of the children and other immigrants who are given a notice to appear never show back up again for their court date. And so that raises the issue, do we have adequate detention facilities and the like to deal with that pending people's court date? We had a similar instance with the surge from Brazil a few years ago, which when under the Bush administration there was a problem with so-called catch and release, which exacerbated this surge from Brazil, but it was dealt with primarily through a means of detaining people until their court date so that then the judge could hear their case and make an appropriate decision under current law. That's not happening now because basically people are given a notice to appear, they never show back up, and by and large they've been successful in accomplishing what they came here in the first place to do, which is to immigrate to the United States outside of our existing law.
Is there a refugee issue or refugee crisis as well as economic immigration?
Well, like many of my colleagues, I've been to refugee camps, Syrian refugee camps in places like Jordan and Turkey. I never thought we'd have refugee camps in America, but that's what it's appearing to be, and you can see some of the reaction to that, which, again, not to repeat myself, well, I guess I am repeating myself, which is what disappoints me so much with the president's request. He's asking for a blank check, in essence, $3.7 billion, but no reform. And I know that he knows, because it's been published and because of conversations with his key leadership, that he knows what he needs to do in order to address this problem. But he apparently, as a result of political calculations, is refusing to do that. And that's really very sad.
Senator Cornyn, the White House characterizes this as a humanitarian crisis that needs a bipartisan solution. They emphasize today it's being managed by FEMA. It has sort of the feel of a national emergency. So does that change the whole nature of the solution?
Well, if it's a national emergency, which I agree that it is, why is the president raising money for 2 days in Texas and refusing to come to the border and see it for himself? Can you imagine can you imagine any president refusing to deal with this firsthand to get the information themselves? It's really important that he do so. But to your point, this is a humanitarian crisis, but it's largely a result of the impression that the president's not interested in enforcing the law, which indeed is then a magnet for illegal immigration into the United States. And so he knows what needs to be done. Secretary Johnson knows what needs to be done, but apparently so far he's refusing to even request Congress to address that because all he's done is ask for essentially a blank check for $3.7 billion of additional spending.
Okay, thanks.